Hi, everybody. My name is Jessie, and I am a settler farmer based in unceded Mi'kma'ki, also known as Southwestern Nova Scotia. And I'm also currently a Master of Human Rights student at the University of Manitoba, studying with Annette Desmarais. So as Joan mentioned, the spaces where any of the 182 member organizations of the Via Campesina can participate in identifying and developing the ideological terrains of the movement are in the collectives and the articulations. So as Joan mentioned, the women's and youth articulations are autonomous units for political decisions of the women and the youth. And these are very powerful spaces where traditionally marginalized voices have room to make decisions without patriarchal influences. As well, a number of NFU members are part of international collectives such as the Agroecology and Seeds Collective, Climate Justice Collective. There's a newly formed political education and training collective up and running. And what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is my involvement and experience with the International Peasant Rights Collective. This is where we work on the process of advocacy, education, and implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas, which was passed in the General Assembly of the United Nations on December 17th, 2018. So the declaration was developed and written by Via Campesina members, and its primary motivation is the recognition of peasants as a social group with claims to access to land, to seeds, natural resources, and the right to decent incomes and livelihoods. So it really is the summation of rights claims that Via Campesina has been compiling across its membership since its creation in the mid-1990s. So I've been involved for a couple of years now, and the photo that you can see on your screen right now is when I was in New York for the final lobbying push prior to its adoption at the General Assembly in December 2018. This was an extraordinarily momentous occasion for the movement. Not only did a social movement succeed in bringing a human rights mechanism to the General Assembly, it succeeded in doing so on the premise of collective or new rights, rights that represent social groups and not individuals. Of course, there are many deniers of collective rights, Canada being one of them, but that doesn't really diminish our push to try to make these rights claims fulfilled in whatever capacity we can do that. So since the adoption, of course, the work has not diminished at all. And a lot of our work now is related to education and awareness building around the declaration, not only as a legal human rights tool, but also as a platform for gathering advocates for food sovereignty together under the same umbrella of collective rights, of peasant rights. It's a platform from which to build solidarity around rights violations and to kind of talk about and unpack how policies perpetuate these rights violations. So despite it being adopted by 121 countries at the UN, it's far from being ratified or implemented in the majority of these. So right now we're trying to strike a balance between grassroots engagement, reaching out to our member organizations, making sure they have the tools to use the declaration to its full potential, and also keeping a foot and sometimes 2 feet in the door in UN spaces where movements like the Via Campesina still don't have a very strong hold in some ways compared to the state and powerful NGO forces. So we're really trying to keep the declaration on a wide array of agendas. And I'm going to pass it over to Nettie now so she can speak a bit more about the Via Campesina's involvement at the FAO.
I'll just talk a little bit about the civil society mechanism. The civil society and Indigenous people mechanism is a group of organizations and movements who have achieved a seat around the table where governments negotiate international guidelines on some key topics. This happened began in 2007, 2008, when there was a huge crisis in the food system. governments realized that they were unable to handle this internationally, and for the first time invited civil society organizations and the private sector also to participate in decision making around the food system policy making. Next slide. Civil society, I should go back one slide. Can you go back one slide? It was actually formed officially in 2010, and the mechanism is a voice, and it's the only voice that we have where we directly negotiate with governments. It's a voice that was specifically it opened a space to be inclusive and allow movements who are rights holders to participate in that conversation and in those negotiations. And the focus of it is that those most affected by food insecurity and malnutrition are rights holders, and that they should be around that table. So this mechanism respects pluralism, autonomy, diversity, and self-organization. There's about 44 movements and organizations that are around the table there. They, of course, represent, as the Via Campesina, many other organizations, but they're networks that sit around the table, and Via Campesina has several seats around that table. And of those 40 some organizations, we choose 8 representatives who are on the advisory committee, who go directly into negotiations with governments. And as you see above, I am one of those advisory group members. It isn't that we actually negotiate. We negotiate guidelines. We don't actually negotiate formal enforceable treaties. And that's a weakness, but it's also a strength in that we can influence the global conversation. And the Via Campesina and civil society mechanism has brought some key issues into the international discourse, such as land tenure, smallholders, relationship to markets, which is a challenge to the globalization and the corporate market dominance. And now in this last round, we have 2 work streams that we're very active in. One is agroecology, which would be an important step forward in terms of challenging the kind of conventional dominant agribusiness model of agriculture. And the second one is gender equality and women's empowerment, where I am the co-chair of the constituency and work with, next slides. Next slide. Yeah, work with wonderful women from the Via Campesina to prepare some guidelines, which will be hopefully adopted internationally and propel forward the equality and justice for women in agriculture and in rural areas. I'll just wrap up here by saying that, next slide, please. I'll wrap up by saying that it's, of course, as you've seen from the last presentations, extraordinarily significant that the Farmers Union as a national organization has such a prominent and important relationship to our allies globally. And we have that through very many avenues, as you saw from the presentations. And for all of us, it's kind of difficult to balance our local commitments and our national work with our international work. But let me just say that over the years, I think it's been very important for our national work that we've engaged in this international work. Not only have we brought huge contributions into the international work, but we ourselves here at home are strengthened and encouraged and educated, and how should I say, we're propelled forward on the momentum of our international work. So I leave that with you. Thanks.